Oh god, why did I watch this? Sandpaper? Barbed wire? Where did the skin go? Oh no, oh no. What's gonna happen to that chicken? I don't know why I did this to myself. As many saw in my last video, I decided to take a deep dive into the extreme horror literary genre. For some reason, as I was doing this, I thought it would be a genius idea to simultaneously watch some of the most disturbing and traumatizing movies as well, and a couple comments in that same video independently encouraged this horrible decision. So that's what I did. I watched 10 of the most notoriously disturbing movies of all time. And yeah, they lived up to the hype. They were really bad. And some of them left me with that same feeling that Cows, the grossest book from the last video, left me with. But were these good movies? Is there any art behind the disgusting veneer? That's what we are going to look at today. Here are the movies I watched this time, in order, and I should say beforehand that there are some obvious exclusions from this list. Don't worry, there are future videos like this planned, so all you Salo and Guinea Pig fans will be satisfied soon. Anyways, the movies. The Human Centipede 2, full sequence. Martyrs. The Poughkeepsie Tapes. Eden Lake. Megan is Missing. The Girl Next Door. A Serbian Film. Irreversible. Pink Flamingos. And Begotten. As in the last video, I will be ranking these movies. This mostly is just a convenient and engaging way to format the discussion, and that discussion is purely based on my own opinions. If you have differing opinions, please share them in the comments, and also give me and the other viewers your recommendations. I wanted to say too that if you enjoy videos like this, I would highly recommend subscribing to my YouTube channel. I primarily do videos on philosophy and dark fiction, with some wildcard videos here and there. I do my best to make every script thought-provoking and interesting. Lastly, I want to issue a content warning here. I'm not going to name specifics because literally every single philia and phobia and variety of violence is featured at least once in these movies, some of them extremely graphically. If you're sensitive to these kinds of things, I would recommend clicking away now. While I will try to avoid discussing anything in detail, some of the topics will have to be broached for the movies to be properly discussed. As just a preview, if you want to avoid movies with sexual violence in particular, Eden Lake is the only safe movie here. Consider yourself warned. And with that said, let's dive into the worst movie of the 10 that I watched. Number 10. Megan is Missing. I have a lot of thoughts about Megan is Missing. I've written this segment a couple times now, and I fill almost 10 pages every time. And I've realized that my thoughts on this movie deserve their own video. So keep an eye out, because soon there will be an upload discussing why Megan is Missing feels so exploitative and gross compared to other, technically more gruesome movies. To me, this was a genuinely fascinating problem and had me thinking deeply about viewer placement and empathy direction and all kinds of stuff. I'll talk about my thesis briefly here, but just know that there will be a more comprehensive analysis coming soon. Megan is Missing was released in 2011. And was directed by Michael Goy, who is usually a cinematographer. It follows Amy and Megan, two 14-year-old girls, as they are slowly manipulated and captured by an online predator. It generated controversy upon release, and during its 2020 TikTok resurgence, because of its extraordinarily graphic content, with some saying the director was a creep for even making it, and that it's just an overall exploitative film. To summarize my feelings about Megan is Missing's exploitativeness, for me, this movie is aesthetically and empathetically gross. Now, I have absolutely no issue with disturbing art. In fact, it's generally what I gravitate towards. My entire last video was evaluating messed up books, and I firmly believe that even the worst, most gruesome stories can be very worthwhile when handled effectively. Megan is Missing is not handled effectively, at all. It fails at the one thing it sets out to do. Megan is Missing tries to depict the exploitation of its young female characters, but it doesn't separate depicting exploitation from actually committing it. Even when there are no predators in the scene, the movie still feels predatory. It makes the viewer complicit in its atrocities, including a 3-minute, unbroken, brutal essay scene. This movie claims to be a PSA about online predation, but ends up basically participating in what it warns us against. Keep in mind that I found this movie to be deeply uncomfortable and exploitative, even in a video where a Serbian film will be discussed. This isn't just a gut reaction though, nor is it baseless, impotent moralizing. There are real aesthetic problems with the movie that make it have an issue directing empathy to the right places, and I will dive deeper into this topic in that upcoming video. But whatever, that stuff is abstract and indefinite, and plenty of people will say, so what dude? All that stuff is realistic, so it deserves to be depicted, especially since the message about the danger of online predators is good. Who cares about framing and aesthetic theory? I can totally understand this, and movies can fail in those above regards while still being of decent quality, so let's move on to how the movie is overall. I'll start with the good. Again, despite those issues, the movie is effective. The ending sequence, especially after that 3-minute horrific scene, is absolutely terrifying, and is probably one of the worst fates a completely innocent protagonist has gone through in a movie while staying realistic. The infamous jump scare at the end is terrifying, and I genuinely had a hard time falling asleep afterwards. The movie contains a pretty realistic sequence of underage drinking. I assume. I was never invited to parties. I wonder why. I liked the concept of the found footage, screen recording, hybrid movie, even if it breaks its own rules to show some scenes, which really doesn't feel right when those scenes it breaks its rules for are the most predatory ones. But whatever. It's still a cool concept. And yeah, the movie has a good message, and still portrays a realistic and horrific scenario surrounding the issue of online predation that more people should be aware of. However, Megan is Missing is an absolute slog to get through. The only feelings you will have during it are boredom and tiredness and an undercurrent of gross discomfort, punctuated by fleeting moments of disgust. So much of the script is brain-dead, over-sexualized teenage blather, written by an adult man trying to understand 14-year-old girls and failing completely. What doesn't help with this is the acting. It's absolutely terrible in most places. The actors are good in the really disturbing scenes, but cannot sell a single line when they are just talking to each other. Now, I'm not going to blame them, because apparently the filming of the movie was pretty hellish for them, and many were underage and new to acting at the time. The problem is that they're inexperienced, and were given a terrible script. Nobody could sell those lines, much less some young, uncomfortable novice actors. Megan is Missing is genuinely just a dull movie that has a few shocking and disturbing moments, some of which are truly effective, but others of which just feel painfully exploitative. Its best feature is probably that it's so uniquely gross that it inspired days of agonized thinking about why I didn't like it, but enjoyed other, similar, and sometimes crazier movies more. I didn't like Megan is Missing at all. It just left me feeling bored and absolutely dirty in a way that I hope the director didn't intend. For that reason, Megan is Missing comes in easily at the bottom of my list. Number 9. The Poughkeepsie Tapes. The Poughkeepsie Tapes is a 2007 mockumentary directed by John Dowdle, surrounding the investigation of a brutal, uncaught, and performative serial killer operating around Poughkeepsie. Going into this, I was influenced by some of the rhetoric I'd seen online, saying this is one of the most disturbing movies of all time. I was kinda surprised when I found that not to be the case. I mean, sure, the movie has some disturbing and taboo stuff going on, but this is a list with Pink Flamingos and Human Centipede 2 on it. That's stiff competition. The movie has a pretty effective opening, which sets up the dread surrounding the killer's most notorious victim, Cheryl Dempsey. From there, I was interested, but the movie slowly lost this initial curiosity. For one, the chronology and logic of the film is pretty confusing. It's possible I'm just stupid, of course, but I found the presentation of the sequence of events to be strange, and I couldn't really assemble a timeline in my head. And some of the killer's actions, presented as genius to the audience, either seemed nonsensical, or the genius nature of it was under-conveyed. This really hurt my immersion into the movie because the whole point of it is that the killer is some omnipotent mastermind, unlike any killer before, but it was just not conveying that. There's the obvious reply to this that, of course the movie has a hard time conveying his actions and crimes, because the killer frequently switched his MO. This is fair, I think, and to a certain extent accurately captures why the movie has such weird presentation, but I think there is a more effective way to convey the chaotic nature of his crimes, even involving the audience in the disorientation that was initially experienced by the police, without making it unsatisfying. Basically, rather than summoning fear and dread through a disorienting true crime depiction, the movie dissipates fear through its overly confusing and strange presentation. I think a lot of the Poughkeepsie Tapes is a kind of meditation on how people try to confront and rationalize the existence of irrational evil. They theorize it, try to contain it in rational categories, try to make sense of it, but it defies every possible interpretation. Some things and some people are just genuinely messed up, inscrutably so, and attempts to understand it can be a lost cause. I think the depiction of the manipulation and subsequent Stockholm Syndrome of Cheryl Dempsey is also effective and pretty sad. The gore and whatnot is generally effective too, because the movie actually isn't that gory. A lot of the movie is more psychologically disturbing, and the quick glimpses of grossness we get let our imaginations do the rest. While it technically features sexual violence, a lot of it is hinted at and stated rather than shown. Unfortunately, the Poughkeepsie Tapes has like 50% bad acting, and can really drag in certain portions. If you're even a little bit tired, then the final third might just knock you out. The movie is in a documentary style, and a lot of the police interviews are depicted. These people are supposed to be unbelievably traumatized by what they've seen, but the actors often aren't skilled enough to convey this, and it ends up feeling more silly than sad. I think the ultimate result is that while mostly inoffensive, the movie didn't impact me in the way that I wanted or the way that it intended, and I found it to be pretty boring at points. It's not a bad movie, but it isn't good, and that's why I place it at number 9. Number 8. The Human Centipede 2. Full Sequence. Oh man. So, while I watched all 3 Human Centipede movies for this list, I chose to only cover the second one in this specific video because I found it to be the most disturbing one, and people online seem to agree with that. If there is interest, I would be happy to cover the other 2 at some point. I find the first one to be a genuinely good movie, and the third one to be, at the very least, a wild, disgusting ride. Directed by Tom Six and released in 2011, The Human Centipede 2 follows a deeply disturbed fan of the first Human Centipede movie, as he goes about constructing his own version of the titular conglomerate beast. I'll be honest, and this is probably one of my hot takes, for whatever reason I found this movie to be better than Megan is Missing and the Poughkeepsie Tapes. And this is shocking because realistically, this movie is more gruesome and violent in nearly every way. On the face of it, The Human Centipede 2 is rough because unlike the first movie's villain, who was a surgeon, this antagonist is just some random guy. He lacks finesse, and his mutilation for the centipede is accomplished with hammers and tape and staples rather than scalpels and sutures. The movie also has a heavy emphasis on sexual violence. Other atrocities include infanticide, and I can't believe I'm saying this, explosive involuntary coprophagia. On paper, it might be surprising then that I found Megan is Missing to be worse. As you're probably seeing right now, Megan is Missing is a kind of fulcrum for my thinking, but let me examine why I thought Human Centipede 2 was decent and deserves to be at number 8. While Megan is Missing attempted to be a PSA, and in my opinion ended up being closer to the opposite, The Human Centipede 2 completely succeeds at what it wants to do. I've always imagined it as a kind of middle finger from director Tom Six. Plenty of people watched the first film and saw that it wasn't this torture porn movie that they wanted, and complained that it wasn't brutal enough. So Tom Six makes a movie about a mentally ill fan of the first film, where he creates his own centipede, and does it in spectacularly grotesque and viscerally offensive fashion. He's saying, "You guys wanted gore? I'll give you some gore." Obviously, the main character being a fan of the first movie supports this interpretation, but he also manages to get a fictionalized version of actress Ashlyn Yenny, who played a character in the first one and is played by herself here, as part of his centipede. The movie is explicitly framed as a kind of gory amplification of the first one, and I can appreciate this self-awareness, even if the self that it's aware of is absolutely vile. Additionally, we get some much-needed distance from the exploitation depicted when the movie ends in a state where it's questionable if anything even happened at all. The movie is also not as boring as Megan is Missing and the Poughkeepsie Tapes, and thankfully is shot in black and white, which simultaneously limits how shocking the gore itself is, while also giving it a grimy overall feel. It at once separates us from the violence, and makes it more impactful. I thought this was a nice touch. It might sound like I really love this movie, and I wouldn't say that's true at all, but admittedly, it's kind of hard to justify why I don't, except for what I think to be a pretty weak reason of, it just made me feel gross and I didn't like it. In that way, it's kind of like the book Cows from the last one. I can recognize how the movie is technically effective and does what it wants to do, and what it wants is to make the viewer feel bad, but that doesn't make for an enjoyable experience, and I didn't like The Human Centipede 2 as a result. However, Cows had some really interesting philosophical and thematic messaging that, from what I saw, The Human Centipede 2 completely lacks, so in that way it's kind of similar to The Slob, another book from the last video, which I ranked at number 10. Since this is a ranking based on my own enjoyment and personal taste, I place it at number 8. But if you want something unabashedly foul, and again, don't really care too much about a movie having something super interesting to say, then maybe you might like this movie. Number 7. The Girl Next Door. The Girl Next Door is a hard movie for me to rank. For those who don't know, The Girl Next Door is a movie based on a novel with the same name by celebrated extreme horror author Jack Ketchum. But he based the events of that novel on the real-life torture and murder of 16-year-old Sylvia Likens. This is hard for me to express with specificity, but it always just struck me as kind of weird that Jack Ketchum felt the need to take the story of Sylvia Likens, change all the stuff that actually links it to her case, and then make it even more messed up. Like, the real story is horrifying enough, and other works have more straightforwardly adapted it. So why change it at all? I wouldn't say it's wrong to do this at all, but it does make me feel kind of weird, so I was already skeptical of this movie going into it. And unfortunately for those who like The Girl Next Door, that probably influenced what I thought of it overall. So I'm gonna at least admit that bias, and if you don't have the same misgivings with the subject matter, you might have a better time, because The Girl Next Door is otherwise quite well made. Directed by Gregory Wilson and released in 2007, The Girl Next Door documents the horrific torture of teenager Meg by her cousins and aunt, as well as the neighborhood kids. Our POV character is David, a kid who has a crush on Meg, and is basically the only character who's nice to Meg at all. I was very thankful for David's inclusion because I thought it kept the movie grounded. If it only featured Meg and her torturers, this movie would have felt like some nightmare world where everyone is evil, and I think that would have done the story a disservice. The Girl Next Door works best when it feels like a kind of unfortunate pocket of evil in an otherwise neutral or good world, which aids the feeling of tragedy for Meg. I also liked that the movie is overall pretty tasteful, at least compared to the other movies on the list. While it technically features nudity, sexual violence, and unbelievably painful torture, The Girl Next Door doesn't go out of its way to show these things in all their gruesome detail. Something graphic might be hinted at, mostly out of frame, shown super quickly, or only the very beginning or very end of it will be featured. And best of all, The Girl Next Door almost never has a problem directing the viewer's empathy to where it needs to go, with the victim, aside from a problem with the POV that I'll get to in a bit. Similarly, I think the evil characters are portrayed in a relatively realistic way. I say relatively because, as someone who only occasionally engages in sadism and murder, I find the escalation hard to accept at face value, but apparently the real-life escalation happened similarly, so the viewer has to accept it. It helps that they aren't just these absurd Emperor Palpatine-level monsters. That makes the movie feel more grounded. The acting is definitely good, but there were some massive ADR syncing issues, especially with the main character Meg, that really took me out of the movie. It felt like I was watching a dub of a Godzilla movie at times, and that isn't a good feeling in an American production. There's another thing, and I don't know if it's the lighting or the cinematography or some kind of filter they used, but in the daytime there was often a strange golden bloom to the movie that looked weird, and overall it just looked like it was made in the 80s. It felt like an older Stephen King movie, if that makes sense. And this is probably intentional, because The Girl Next Door is mostly a flashback, and has that vibe of nostalgia and remembered trauma, and the golden haze and older feel is meant to evoke that. This is a fine aesthetic choice, but it kind of gets into the reason why I found this movie to be less than perfect. I'm gonna spoil the movie here, so if you really don't want to know, go ahead and skip to the next segment, but since it's based on Sylvia Likens, you should probably be able to guess what happens. As I said, The Girl Next Door is a flashback, but it's a flashback from David's perspective. He's remembering the time when he fell in love with Meg and then witnessed her torture and eventually her death. Earlier, I praised David's inclusion, but I don't like the way that he was included overall. To me, making the movie follow David was a strange choice because David is completely ineffective at stopping Meg's torture. He's a character who pretty much fails at his goal of saving Meg, maddeningly so at certain points, especially in one scene where he almost tells his mother about Meg's abuse, but stops because she doesn't immediately wake up when he calls out her name. Now sure, David does stick up for her at points, but never in a way that changes the outcome, so his perspective feels hollow as a result. To make this make a little bit more sense, I'd say that witnessing this from Meg's POV, or even Meg's sister who also shares some of the abuse, it might be more interesting. You could frame David as this guy who acts nice to her and pretends to love her, but is more interested in self-preservation and conformity overall. He's kind but still problematic. And that is a more coherent and compelling dynamic than what we get, where we still have to empathize with David and root for him, but also accept that he completely fails to act for reasons that aren't really stated. And what's more, because the movie is a flashback from David's POV, the true focus of the film is about how Meg's trauma and death affects him. Meg is relegated to an object that gets tortured merely for the main character's emotional development, but what that development isn't clear. As Meg dies, she whispers to David that it's what you do last that counts. Taken together with David's failure to succeed in saving her, this is an absurd message, and isn't the kind of emotional payoff or justification we need for focusing on David over Meg. In fact, in the beginning of the movie, David reflects on the nature of pain, but every example of pain he gives is always the pain of someone else, including Meg. He never experiences pain himself, so the movie ends up being thematically unresolved. Basically, by focusing on David, we are told that the most interesting thing in this movie's world is how Meg's torture and death affects him, but the movie doesn't do a good job giving David a dynamic element of growth, and thus fails to actually tell us why his POV is narratively richer than Meg's or Meg's sister. So sure, the golden haze and old-style feeling is a neat touch, but it's the result of a choice to displace the narrative's POV from Meg or Meg's sister to David, for reasons that I don't really understand and didn't appreciate artistically or thematically. I can happily say that The Girl Next Door was well made, and that it effectively directs empathy and remains tasteful, but this issue I just outlined, plus the whole adaptation issue from the beginning of this segment, made me enjoy it less than I otherwise would. For that reason, I place it at number 7. Number 6. Pink Flamingos. So, for those who were expecting a horror-only list, this entry will probably disappoint you, but there's a reason why I didn't say horror in the title, because I absolutely had to include this movie. Pink Flamingos famously stars Divine, and was directed by John Waters. I knew absolutely nothing about Pink Flamingos before my friend showed it to me recently, except that he told me to read the top of the Wikipedia page for the list of taboos that it breaks. I'll show it on screen now, and keep in mind that this movie was selected for preservation in the Library of Congress. I seriously cannot get over how crazy that is. It is comical how exhaustively filthy Pink Flamingos is, and that's basically the whole point of the movie, but I think that's meaningful, as we will see. Pink Flamingos follows Babs, the filthiest person alive, as she navigates her family life while she's targeted by a couple who aim to upstage her as even filthier. You may question how filthy the people in this movie are, but I beg you, do not underestimate this movie. It is unabashedly insane. There are unsimulated sex scenes and otherwise extraordinarily graphic nudity, which combine to make Pink Flamingos feel borderline pornographic. You know, I was about to just read a sentence of a bunch of other stuff, but seriously, it is just so gross, and there's so many things, like literally every foul thing you can think of, this movie has it. Weirdly enough, for me, the most disturbing thing about this movie was Babs' mother, who has this irrational obsession with eggs and acts like a baby all the time. It's just unsettling. But yeah, Pink Flamingos, as far as shocking content goes, is up there with the worst of them. The movie is also hilarious. While a lot of the acting is pretty bad, generally the line delivery is perfect, whether or not it's convincing. Even the narration segments are ridiculously funny, as they're done in an over-enunciated, absurd style. I'm not sure how much meaning I want to ascribe to Pink Flamingos. It's not that I think there is none, but I'm just guessing that from what I've seen online, the movie is really about the LGBT experience, and that's not something I can speak too much on. I'd hazard that the film is a kind of reclaiming of some sort. The gay community was ostracized and demonized as filthy and gross and immoral, so John Waters made a movie where filth and grossness were celebrated, and every moral precept is uprooted. I definitely could be wrong here though, and maybe some more knowledgeable people can add to the discussion in the comments. Overall though, I liked the movie and enjoyed its over-the-top nature and its funniness. It reminded me of Grandpappy from the last video. It was just absurd and crazy, and while the thematic content didn't land with me because I'm not really part of the community, I can appreciate that it's there, and I remember the movie mostly pretty fondly. I do have an issue with it though, and I have to be careful here. There's a graphic essay scene at one point, and a chicken was pulled into the mix and seemingly killed. Fans of Pink Flamingos and John Waters seem to get pretty defensive when this part of the movie is brought up, but I think that's a mistake. You can still love your favorite director and acknowledge that they did something messed up in an earlier movie. And it is messed up. As far as I can tell, a real chicken was literally crushed between the actors' naked bodies in the filming process. John Waters even admits it, and basically says, well, at least it got laid before it died. While slightly funny, that's just not okay, and any attempt to brush it off by trying to point to factory farming or whatever as evidence of hypocrisy just seems weak. When we make our idols immune to criticism, we've gone too far, and it's essential to acknowledge that fiction ceases to be just transgressive when real things are exploited. That didn't drag down my opinion of the movie too far, because overall I enjoyed it. I just enjoyed other things more, and that's why I place it at number 6. Number 5, Eden Lake. From here, we have movies that I like pretty much uncontroversially, and it's now down to how good they are rather than comparing their overall flaws. Eden Lake is a British movie directed by James Watkins and released in 2008. It follows Jenny and Steve as they travel to Eden Lake for a little getaway, and there they run into the most terrifying threat of all time: a group of British teenagers. A lot of this film's taboo nature is lost on people who aren't from the United Kingdom. Eden Lake is an example of something called hoodie horror, which tends to portray low-class British people as morally degenerated and villainous, and this all ties to the general social climate in the UK around this movie's release. I'd say then that Eden Lake is consistent with this so-called hoodie horror genre. Eden Lake is consistently mask-off about its views on poor people. They are dirty, child-abusing, irresponsible, apathetic, and downright murderous in certain circumstances. If you haven't seen the movie, you may think I'm exaggerating, but I'm being so serious. Now, Eden Lake flirts with the idea that our more upper-class heroes are somehow just as bad as the villains, and definitely tries to give the lower-class antagonists some sympathy. Their area is getting gentrified, the kids are products of cycles of abuse, and Steve, Jenny's boyfriend, is judgmental and outright criminal when he just randomly breaks into one of the kids' homes. However, the movie never solidifies this line of thinking. In the end, we are forced to accept a kind of classist message that, in this world, the lower class people are just terrible. But honestly, this didn't bother me that much, because otherwise, this movie is fun as hell. Well, it's actually not fun at all. Eden Lake is grim and snuffs out every ray of hope your mind will latch onto. And it's actually stunning to me that Eden Lake manages to have this completely stifling atmosphere and mood while not being too gory or gratuitous. Like yes, there's torture and blood, but Eden Lake doesn't always make a spectacle of its violence. It's rather able to sustain its tension by repeatedly creating hope and then revoking it, and we, the stupid audience, buy into it every time. Most people focus on the movie's notorious ending, which I won't spoil here because it's honestly amazing. But for me, the best part was the dynamic of the group of teens. Watching psychopathic leader Brett assert control was fascinating and scary, and it was interesting how he used leverage and manipulation to force his friends to do his bidding. And this is part of the hopelessness and sympathy for the villains that I mentioned earlier. It's made quite clear to us that many of the teens are deeply uncomfortable with what the group is doing. They protest and fight back, but Brett is able to turn their self-preservation against them by telling them that they've gone too far already. If they stop, Steve and Jenny will escape and tell the police. They have to finish the job. And don't even get me started on the scene where one of the kids goes to help Jenny. Eden Lake, as its name might suggest, literally starts off with beautiful golden hues and melodramatic music and a clean aesthetic, and ends in dirt and mud and blood. The movie is an exercise in decay, just like the society that it sees as morally decayed. Also, Eden Lake is anti-natalist as heck, and that's just cool. For anyone who wants to watch an extreme movie, but doesn't want to see gratuitous sexual violence or outlandish gore, perhaps something closer to mainstream sensibilities, Eden Lake is a really good choice. It's hard to dislike, but I like others more, and this has some cultural baggage that makes its full impact lost on foreigners, so that's why I place it at number 5. Number 4. Begotten. Ranking this movie feels wrong. This is barely even a movie. It feels more like you're watching impossible footage of a Neolithic pagan ritual. Begotten is an experimental film directed by Edmund Elias Merhige. I don't know how to pronounce that. This was my first experimental film, outside of something like Eraserhead, which probably doesn't count as one anyways, so I was a little bit nervous. I was honestly expecting to watch something absurdly boring for an hour, and I was worried I'd then have to pretend to like it in order to protect my intellectual credibility. Thankfully, that's not the case. That's not to say I didn't get bored. There were moments where a scene was starting to grate on me, but it would almost always change to something new right after that. I don't know if that's something anybody else experienced, but I was wildly impressed with this. It was as if the director could tell exactly when the viewer's attention span would run out, and pushed every scene right to that limit, just to quickly overrun them with a brand new on-screen atrocity. Begotten is a disturbing film. It starts out with God disemboweling himself, and then God's corpse births some woman who then impregnates herself with God's dead seed, which results in a deformed, squirming man creature who's captured by some weirdos. Then, the deformed guy pukes up his organs, and the weirdos kill him as a sacrifice or something, but then his mom comes back and resurrects him, but then they're both attacked again, and brutalized and dismembered and buried, and then their graves are sites for new growths of life, and then the cycle seems to repeat again. Disturbing, right? Well, that's just the plot. It doesn't even begin to cover how effectively this movie was able to get under my skin. The movie lingers for so long on every single scene, and all the movements and actions are so uncanny. Everything feels so unbelievably wrong. And the soundtrack, oh god. The ambient track that accompanies the auto-disembowelment of God was stuck in my head for days afterwards because of how weird and uncomfortable it was. Begotten's soundtrack is full of gasping breaths, choking gurgles, watery splatters, haunting music, crickets chirping, ominous droning, and so much more. The soundtrack was my favorite part of the movie because it was selected with surgical precision with each scene. It always perfectly complemented the visual atrocities for maximum repulsion. What a great time. Seriously, if you're not sold, just watch the first 5 minutes. It's not hard to find online, and you have nothing to lose except maybe your sanity. The question of what it all means is probably many a viewer's first question, but to be honest, I'm not sure I want to try and answer that. Anything I say would likely be very superficial, and I don't want to spoil what was such a unique and physically unsettling experience by trying to over-intellectualize it after just one viewing. Perhaps after multiple viewings and more research, I could try to present something more concrete, but right now, I just enjoyed immersing myself in this nightmarish experimental film. For this one, I'm gonna say the ranking doesn't matter that much. I didn't not enjoy anything about the movie, and comparing it to others on this list is like comparing apples to oranges. It's just different. But because I have to place it due to my own stupid rules, I'm gonna acknowledge that I technically had a better time with more definite thoughts about the next 3 movies, so I place Begotten at number 4. Number 3. A Serbian Film. Yep, I'm sorry everybody, I liked it. Yeah, I know. This movie is beyond messed up. And to be clear, I only watched the cut version, which has about 6 minutes of footage removed. I don't think my opinion would somehow reverse if I saw this extra footage, but who knows with these kinds of movies. A Serbian Film, directed by Srdan Spasojevic and released in 2010, is probably the most notorious movie of all time, and if not the most, is definitely in the top 10. It follows a somewhat retired adult film actor and, oh god, loving husband and father who is trying to make a re-entrance into the adult film business. He gets into contact with a man named Vukmir, a visionary director intending to make startling new artistic works of porn. A Serbian film has been called every single derogatory term that a movie could possibly be called, and then some. For the longest time, it was nearly impossible to get for cheap or free without illegal methods, and I was not excited to watch this. I was terrified, thinking that it would basically be traumatizing low-budget trash, but I didn't find it to be like that. In fact, I found it to be a sleek, startlingly well-made and well-acted film that honestly made me confused about the overall reception. I agree that the movie is foul and vile and beyond disgusting. No taboo goes unbroken in this movie. You'll wish that even a minuscule fraction of God's holy light had touched this absolutely profane monstrosity, but some people seem to think the movie is just shocking to be shocking and is little more than that. Apparently, the director talks a lot about how it relates to Serbia and their government, and that the movie is some rebellion against, quote, the fascism of political correctness. That's a pretty insane quote, and I can't speak much on this overall because I don't really know much about Serbian history or culture or their political situation. What I can say is that this movie was a shocking meditation on exploitation. This is gonna sound crazy, but this exploitation theme and impenetrable underground organization aspect kind of reminded me of a Kafka novel. It's like if you made a vile adult film parody of The Trial. I'm sorry that these words are coming out of my mouth, but they are what I thought. This is also what helped the heinous stuff that goes on seem a little bit more, not acceptable, but I don't know, not as horrifically revolting as maybe it should have been, because the movie never, not once, pretends that any of the stuff that goes on in it was okay. It never condones any single part of the unholy atrocities featured within. Nearly every character that wasn't directly involved with the underground production company was exploited and made to participate against their will. So yes, a lot of horrible stuff happened, but it's not like the movie was celebrating any of it. It's always portrayed as morally abhorrent to the characters, and I think that bit of distance made the film not as outright offensive to me as it was to other people, and illustrates a clear difference between what a piece of art features or depicts and what it condones. Those are two very separate things, and a Serbian film, in my opinion, stayed on the right side of that line, though others may disagree. Another thing I really liked was the soundtrack. God, it was just so fun. I know I'm sick, I know, but I was listening to it even after the movie ended. It goes absolutely crazy and has no right to be as fun as it is. Turn on Pazi Radis, or however you say that, and try not to vibe. So yes, I'm terrible, send me to jail immediately, because I found a Serbian film to be a pretty engrossing Kafkaesque movie that definitely delivered on the disturbing angle while not sacrificing plot and thematic quality. And yeah, it was gruesome, unbelievably so, but it didn't leave me feeling as absolutely loathsome as some of the other stuff I've encountered recently. So yeah, I'm placing it at number 3, and I'm also hiring a therapist. Number 2. Martyrs. Martyrs, directed by Pascal Laugier and released in 2008, was actually my first ever movie in this loose genre of disturbing movies. This was the movie I showed to my friends that scared me beyond belief and showed me that dark movies could contain something transcendent within them. Martyrs follows Lucy, a victim of a mysterious torture operation, and her best friend Anna, as they try to find the people responsible for Lucy's torture. It's hard not to rave about nearly every aspect of this movie. The acting is absolutely impeccable on almost every front, especially from Lucy's actresses, who play her when she's a kid and also when she's an adult. The opening scene, followed by the credits, is heartbreaking and grim, and you instantly know that there will not be a single moment of non-negativity here. The apparition that we're introduced to shortly afterwards is nightmare-inducing. The introduction of the family and their subsequent slaughter is one of the most shocking scenes I've probably ever witnessed. Lucy's battle with her apparition is extremely sad and hard to watch, and then we get introduced to spoiler territory. And I don't want to go there yet for anyone who hasn't seen it. Seriously, if you haven't seen Martyrs and want to watch something grim on a deeply existential level, turn this stupid video off and watch it, because while I won't discuss specifics, my overarching discussion will give away major ideas within the movie. Martyrs is probably the most overtly philosophical movie on this list, and that just automatically makes it appeal to me. There are the obvious Bataille influences through the limited experience stuff and sacrificial pain being this almost sacred thing, and of course the Lingqi picture used by the organization as an example of a martyr, which Bataille apparently kept in his office to look at because he was a demented pervert. Anything deeply influenced by Bataille will, at the very least, be interesting. And of course, there's the ending. It inspired a really interesting discussion between my friend and I when we watched it. It lends itself to such powerful existential interpretations and is sure to stick in your mind whether you like it or not. I also tend to think that Martyrs is a kind of anti-torture porn movie. This could be just my own projection, of course, but Martyrs imagines a scenario where people facilitate and watch torture for quite literally the most important metaphysical purpose, and even then it's useless. I don't know, that's not the most developed idea I have, obviously, but I don't think it's nothing. Martyrs might also be the most uncompromisingly bleak and nihilistic movie on this list. I've said it a ton of times already, but nothing at all is good here. The music is just tragic from the opening scene, and even the most minor interactions, even kind ones, have a hidden darkness behind them. There's a scene near the end where one of the people in the organization shows a slight bit of humanity towards Anna, and at first the audience is grateful for it, but it only portends something much, much worse that is about to happen to her. I can very much appreciate the ambitiousness of this movie's hopelessness. My only gripe with Martyrs is that there are a couple scenes where the acting is slightly less than perfect and seems just a tiny bit silly. I hate saying this because otherwise the acting is phenomenal and horrifically evocative, but these few scenes keep it from being flawless to me. It's a nitpick, and I'm sure on yet another repeat viewing I wouldn't be as harsh, but that's just how I felt. Despite that one tiny thing, Martyrs is just an excellent, grim, and thought-provoking experience. I can't rightfully ask for something better, but there is one movie I watched that is somehow even more ambitious, and that's why I place it at number 2. Number 1. Irreversible. It was kind of inevitable that this movie would be number 1. Irreversible, directed by Gaspar Noé and released in 2002, is one of the most meticulously constructed and conceptually interesting films that I have ever seen. It's also easily the most critically beloved and commented upon movie in this list, so I'm afraid I won't have anything novel to say. Here are some cool things about it. Irreversible is a backwards movie, like literally. The film is given in reverse chronological order. The entire thing is constructed to seem like it was all done in one take. The acting, sometimes persisting through extensive and grueling sequences, remains stunningly perfect throughout. The camera work is at first highly disorienting and kinetic, and slowly calms as we approach the beginning of the night's events. The soundtrack is perfect for every scene. Perfect is a good word, honestly. Every frame of this film feels like it was meticulously constructed. It was a seamless experience, and thus it's honestly hard to pick out isolated things as examples of this movie's goodness. For those who don't know, Irreversible is centered around the sexual assault of a woman named Alex, and begins with the aftermath, mostly following her ex-boyfriend Pierre and her current boyfriend Marcus, as they seek revenge against the perpetrator. Irreversible is notorious for its inclusion of a very long and painful depiction of that assault about midway through, and my god, it is borderline unwatchable. But I found this movie to be the least exploitative example on this list. I'll discuss Irreversible and its infamous scene more so in the Megan is Missing follow-up video, because I would contend that Irreversible is almost a perfect counterpoint to Megan is Missing in how it directs empathy and situates the viewer and feels tasteful rather than exploitative. It helps that the actress playing Alex, Monica Bellucci, basically directed the scene and ensured that it was done in a respectful way. But yeah, there will be further discussion on this movie and that scene there. In the Hannibal TV show, there's this running metaphor of a teacup being dropped and then shattering, and Hannibal ruminates on how it might be if the teacup were capable of reversing its own shattering. To me, this movie explores that, and its explicit theme of time ruins all things supports this. This movie reverses the trauma that a harsh world visits upon its inhabitants, and by ending on the prior happiness, forces a poignant sense of tragedy upon the viewer. For now though, despite being probably the hardest movie to watch, I think this is the most morally robust movie here, and I and many others consider it to be at least feminist inclined. If you have any sensitivity to the subject matter, the movie will probably be pretty triggering, but if you can sit through it, Irreversible is I don't even know how to say it, momentous, important. It's a weighty and gut-wrenching and frustrating and affecting cinematic experience. And due to its sheer perfection in quality, thoughtful moral themes, careful, empathetic handling of its subject matter, and conceptual ambition, I place it easily at number 1. Okay, that's my ranking and discussion of the 10 movies that I watched. Unlike the disturbing books video, I did not feel anywhere near as gross this time around as for that. I'm not exactly sure why that is, other than that some of the books in the last video were just, God, so gross. I enjoyed these for the most part, and it got me thinking deeper about movies, especially after witnessing Megan is Missing. There will definitely be more videos like this, and keep an eye out for the follow-up video. With that said, thank you for watching, please consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video, and have a nice day.